The gavel had not even fallen yet, and Elena Marchetti already knew her life was over. She stood behind a velvet curtain in a room she did not recognize, in a building she had never seen before tonight, wearing a dress that was not hers. Her hands were tied loosely in front of her with a silk cord, more symbol than restraint, and somewhere beyond the curtain she could hear men laughing, glasses clinking, numbers being called out like it was nothing, like she was nothing. Her father had told her they were going to a dinner. A business dinner, he said. Nothing to worry about. Just smile and be polite. Then a car had taken her somewhere else. Then two women she did not know had changed her clothes and told her not to scream, because screaming would only make things worse. She had asked worse than what, and neither woman answered her. Now she stood alone, shaking, listening to a voice on the other side of the curtain describe her like a piece of furniture. 23 years old, well-educated, comes from a respected family. Comes, the voice said, with a debt attached. The bidding began. Elena closed her eyes and thought about her father, Vincent Marchetti, and how 3 days ago he had kissed her forehead and told her everything was fine. She thought about how he had not answered his phone since yesterday morning. She thought about how a man named Damien Cross had shown up at their house 1 week earlier, calm and quiet, and told her father that some debts could not be settled with money. She had not understood what that meant. She understood it now. The bidding numbers rose fast. She heard them through the curtain, heard the greed in them, heard men she had never met deciding what she was worth. Her legs wanted to give out. She forced herself to stay standing, because some small, stubborn part of her refused to let these strangers see her fall. Then a voice cut through the room, flat and cold, and every other voice went silent. It was not the highest number that had been called. It was simply final. No one challenged it. The curtain was pulled back. Elena blinked against the light and saw him standing there among the crowd of expensive suits and expensive watches, not smiling, not looking pleased with himself the way she expected the man who had just bought her to look. Damien Cross looked at her the way a man looks at a bill he has been waiting a long time to collect. He did not touch her. He did not speak to her. He turned to the man running the auction and said only one sentence. "Tell Vincent Marchetti his debt is paid." Elena felt the room tilt. Paid. She was the payment. Whatever her father owed this man, whatever crime or deal or betrayal had happened behind closed doors, the price had just been settled with her body standing on a stage. A car ride followed that Elena would never fully remember, because her mind kept trying to protect her from it, sliding away from the details, leaving only fragments. The leather seat beneath her, the city lights sliding past the window, gold and blurred through her tears. Damien Cross, sitting across from her, not next to her, watching the road instead of watching her, as if she were already something settled and no longer interesting. "You are not going to be hurt," he said at last, when the silence became too heavy even for him. Elena did not believe him. Why would she? He had bought her like a car or a painting. Men who did that did not care whether people believed them. "I don't care what you call it," she said, her voice shaking but her chin lifted. "You bought me. That is what happened. Don't tell me stories about it." For the first time, something flickered across his face. Not anger. Something closer to surprise, as if he had expected her to be afraid, and had gotten something else instead. "I am not interested in stories either, Miss Marchetti," he said. "I am interested in your father learning what it costs to ruin people and walk away smiling." "And what does that have to do with me?" she asked. "I didn't ruin anyone." He looked at her then, really looked, for the first time since the curtain had opened. "No," he said quietly. "You didn't." He said nothing else for the rest of the ride. The house he brought her to was not a mansion of chains and locked doors like she had imagined. It sat on a cliff above the ocean, all glass and pale stone, quiet and beautiful in a way that felt wrong given the circumstances. A house like that should not belong to a man who bought people at auctions. A woman named Grace met them at the door, introduced simply as staff, and showed Elena to a room with a wide window facing the water. There was a closet full of new clothes in her size. There was a lock on the door, but Grace told her, almost apologetically, that the lock was for her own use, if she wanted privacy. Elena did not sleep that night. She sat by the window and watched the waves and waited for the moment when the calm politeness would end, and the truth of what she was here for would begin. She waited for footsteps outside her door. She waited for the version of this story she had been taught to expect. The footsteps never came. Morning arrived with sunlight pouring through the window, and Elena woke to find she had fallen asleep in the chair, still in yesterday's clothes, still waiting for a nightmare that had not happened yet. She splashed water on her face and walked out of the room, half expecting to be stopped. No one stopped her. She found Damien Cross in a kitchen that looked more like something from a design magazine than a real place people lived, drinking coffee alone at a long marble counter, reading something on his phone with the same flat, unreadable expression he had worn during the auction and during the ride here. "You're allowed to walk around the house," he said without looking up. "There is a car in the garage if you want to go into town. Grace will go with you." Elena stared at him. "Am I a prisoner or a guest?" she asked, "because I genuinely cannot tell." He finally looked up. "You are neither," he said. "You are collateral that already served its purpose. What happens next is still being decided." "By who?" she asked. "You?" He did not answer that. He simply looked back down at his phone, and Elena understood that this man measured every word before he gave it away, that nothing he said was accidental, and that the things he refused to say might matter more than the things he did. She spent the next several days learning the shape of her new strange life. She learned that Grace was kind in a careful, watchful way, like someone who had been told to be kind but had decided on her own to mean it. She learned that a man named Nathan handled the gates and the security cameras and rarely spoke to her at all. She learned that Damien left the house early most mornings and came back late, and that when he was home he mostly stayed in a study with the door shut, and that the rest of the house, strangely, felt like it belonged to her. She tried the front gate on the fourth day, just to see. It opened. Nathan, standing nearby, said nothing, only watched her with something like curiosity, as if wondering what she would do with a freedom no one had told her she had. She did not run, not that day. She told herself it was because she did not know where her father was, whether he was safe, whether running would put her in danger from people far worse than Damien Cross. She told herself many reasons. She was not sure any of them were the real one. That evening, she found Damien on the terrace outside the study, looking out at the ocean instead of working for once. She stood in the doorway a long moment before she spoke. "Why did you buy me?" she asked. The real reason, not the auction speech. He was quiet long enough that she thought he would not answer at all. "Your father," he said finally, "took everything from my family once. Not money. Something worse than money. He built his fortune on the ruins of mine and never once looked back to see what he had destroyed." "I didn't know any of that," Elena said. "I still don't know what that means." "I know you didn't," he said. "That is the only reason you are standing on this terrace instead of somewhere far worse." Elena felt something cold settle in her chest. Not fear exactly, but the sharp understanding that she had been dropped into the middle of a war that had started long before she was born. A war between her father and this man, and that she was standing in the wreckage of it, without ever having chosen a side. "Then tell me," she said. "Tell me what he did. I have a right to know why my life just got taken apart because of it." Damien turned to look at her fully then, and for a moment the coldness in his eyes cracked just slightly, revealing something underneath that looked almost like grief. "Not tonight," he said, "but I will tell you." He walked back inside and left her alone on the terrace with the sound of the waves and 100 new questions. And Elena stood there a long time, watching the dark water, wondering how a man who had bought her like an object could also be the first person in a very long while who had promised her the truth, instead of a lie, meant to keep her calm. She did not know yet that this promise would change everything. She did not know that the story she thought she understood, a cruel man punishing an innocent daughter for her father's sins, was only the surface of something far deeper, far older, and far more painful than she could imagine. She only knew that for the first time since the curtain had opened on that stage, she was more curious than afraid. And curiosity, she would soon learn, was far more dangerous than fear had ever been. 3 days passed before Damien kept his promise. Elena had almost given up expecting it. She had spent those 3 days wandering the edges of her new life, testing its limits the way a person tests ice on a lake, one careful step at a time. She had gone into town with Grace, had walked along a small street lined with bakeries and flower shops, had felt, for a strange and guilty moment, almost normal. Then she had remembered why she was there, and the feeling had left her as quickly as it came. It was Grace, in the end, who gave her the first real piece of the truth, not Damien. They were folding laundry together in a sunlit room at the back of the house, an oddly ordinary task that Elena had started doing simply because sitting still made her mind spin too fast. Grace was younger than Elena had first guessed, maybe 26 or 27, with a quiet steadiness that made her easy to be around. "You keep looking at him like you're trying to solve a puzzle," Grace said, not unkindly. "Because I am," Elena said. "Nobody will give me the pieces." Grace hesitated, folding a towel with more care than the task required. "I shouldn't say anything," she said. "It's not my story to tell." "Please," Elena said. "I'm not asking you to betray him. I just want to understand why I'm here." Grace was quiet for a long moment, then set the towel down. "His mother's name was Claire," she said finally. "Claire Cross. She used to run a small investment firm, years ago, before Damien was even out of school. Your father was one of her biggest clients." Elena's hands went still over the laundry. "What happened?" she asked. "There was an investigation," Grace said carefully. "Money went missing from client accounts. A lot of money. Claire was blamed for it. She lost everything. Her reputation, her business, her home. She died 2 years later, before it was ever cleared up. And by then, no one cared enough to clear it up for her." Elena felt sick. "Are you saying my father did something to her?" she asked. "I'm saying Damien believes he did," Grace said. "I'm saying he's spent a long time trying to prove it. And I'm saying your father has spent just as long making sure he never could." Elena sat with that for a long time after Grace left the room, staring at a folded towel in her lap without seeing it. She thought about her father, the man who had taught her to ride a bicycle, who had cried at her college graduation, who called her his whole world every single birthday. She could not make that man match the man Grace had just described, and yet she could not make herself dismiss it either, because her father had also vanished the moment trouble came, had also left her behind to face it alone, and that at least was not a rumor, that she had lived. She found Damien later that evening on the terrace again, exactly where she had left him 3 nights before, as if he had been waiting for her to come find him once she had heard enough to ask real questions. "Grace told me about your mother," she said, before her courage could fail her. Something shifted behind his eyes, something guarded and old. "I asked her not to," he said quietly. "I asked her to," Elena said. "Don't be angry with her. Be angry with me, if you need to be angry with someone." He looked at her for a long moment, and something in his face softened just slightly, the way stone softens under enough patient water. "My mother built that firm from nothing," he said finally. "She worked 20 years for it. Your father brought her the kind of money that could have changed everything for us, and instead it destroyed her. When the accounts came up short, everyone assumed the woman running the company had taken it. No one asked whether the man who controlled where that money actually went might have moved it somewhere else first." "Do you have proof?" Elena asked. "Real proof, not just belief." "Pieces," he said. "Not enough, not yet." "And if you never find enough," she asked, "what then? You keep women on stages until the math works out?" His jaw tightened, and for a moment she thought she had pushed him too far, that the calm control would finally crack into the cruelty she had expected from the beginning. Instead, he looked away from her, out at the dark water, and when he spoke again, his voice was quieter than she had ever heard it. "I am not proud of how you got here," he said. "I told myself it was the only way to make him listen. I am starting to think I was wrong." Elena did not know what to say to that, so she said nothing, and they stood together in a silence that felt different than the silences before it. Less like a wall and more like a bridge neither of them had finished building yet. The days that followed felt like a slow thaw. Damien began coming home earlier. He began eating dinner at the table instead of in his study, and though their conversations were often short and careful, they were conversations, not interrogations, not silence. He taught her, almost by accident, how to identify constellations from the terrace, correcting her when she mixed up 2 stars with the confidence of someone used to being right about facts, and unused to being teased about it. You're wrong about that one, she told him one night, pointing at the sky. That's not the North Star. It's too far to the left. It is the North Star, he said. It is not, she said. I'll bet you. Bet me what? He asked. And there was something almost like amusement in his voice, something she had not heard from him before. If I'm right, she said, you tell me one true thing about yourself, something that has nothing to do with my father or your mother or any of this. He considered that for a long moment, then nodded once. Deal, he said. He was wrong. She was right. And true to his word, later that night, standing at the edge of the terrace with the ocean wind pulling at both of them, he told her that he had once wanted to be an architect, before his mother's ruin had forced him into a harder, colder kind of life, one built on debts and leverage instead of buildings. I still draw sometimes, he admitted, almost embarrassed by it. Houses, bridges, things that will probably never exist anywhere but on paper. Show me, Elena said. He hesitated, and for the first time since she had met him, Damien Cross looked genuinely uncertain, like a man being asked to hand over something fragile. He showed her the next morning. A small drawer in his study held a stack of sketches, careful and precise. Houses with wide windows facing the sea, a bridge curved like a wave frozen in place. Elena looked through them slowly, feeling something in her chest loosen that she had not expected to loosen around this man at all. You're good, she said honestly. Really good. It doesn't matter now, he said, taking the sketches back gently and returning them to the drawer, as if putting away a version of himself he rarely let out. It matters that you still do it, she said. That means some part of you is still choosing to hope for something better, even after everything. He looked at her for a long moment, something unreadable moving across his face, and Elena felt the air between them shift into something neither of them had a name for yet. It was Nathan who broke the fragile peace, 3 days later, without meaning to. Elena had gone down to the garage to look at the car Damien had offered her the use of, thinking she might drive into town alone for the first time, when Lucas, one of the security men who worked under Nathan, stopped her at the door with a hand on her arm that was rougher than it needed to be. You don't go anywhere without someone clearing it first, he said, his grip tightening slightly when she tried to pull away. Let go of me, Elena said, more startled than afraid, though the fear came quickly after. Lucas did not let go, not until a voice from across the garage cut through the tension like a blade. Take your hand off her. Damien's voice was quiet, but it carried a weight that made Lucas release her instantly and step back, his expression shifting from authority to something closer to fear. She is not staff, and she is not a prisoner, Damien said, walking closer, his eyes fixed on Lucas with an intensity Elena had not seen before. You do not touch her. Not now, not ever. Is that clear? Yes, sir, Lucas said, his voice tight. If it happens again, Damien said, you will not work for me anymore. Anywhere. Do you understand what that means? Lucas nodded quickly and left without another word, and Elena stood there in the sudden quiet of the garage, her arm still faintly aching where his fingers had gripped it, staring at the man who had just defended her with more force than she had ever seen him use for anything. Are you all right? Damien asked, and this time his voice was soft, almost hesitant, nothing like the voice he had just used on Lucas. I'm fine, she said, though her hands were shaking slightly. Thank you. He did not answer right away. He simply looked at her, and something in his expression made Elena feel, for the first time since the curtain had opened on that stage weeks ago, that she was not collateral to this man anymore. She was something else entirely, something he did not yet have words for either. That night, unable to sleep, Elena found herself walking the quiet halls of the house, long after everyone else had gone to bed, and she found Damien in his study, not working, simply sitting with a glass of water he had not touched, staring at nothing. Can't sleep either, she asked from the doorway. He looked up, and for a moment there was no wall between them at all, just two people who had both been carrying something heavy for far too long. I keep thinking about Lucas's hands on your arm, he admitted quietly. I keep thinking about what would have happened if I hadn't come down when I did. You did come down, she said, stepping into the room. That's what matters. It shouldn't have happened at all, he said. None of this should have happened. I brought you into a world that was never yours to be part of. Elena crossed the room and sat down across from him, closer than she might have a week earlier. Maybe it wasn't fair, how it started, she said carefully, but I'm not the same person who stood behind that curtain anymore, and I don't think you're the same man who bought me either. Damien looked at her for a long moment, something raw and unguarded moving behind his eyes, and Elena felt her heart quicken in a way that had nothing to do with fear at all. I should let you leave, he said quietly, almost to himself. I keep telling myself I should, and every day I find another reason not to. Maybe, Elena said softly, I don't want you to. The words hung in the air between them, fragile and honest, and neither of them moved to take them back. Outside, the ocean kept moving against the cliffs the way it always had, patient and endless, indifferent to the quiet, terrifying thing that had just begun to grow between two people who had started as enemies and were becoming something neither of them had names for yet. But somewhere beyond that quiet room, beyond the walls of that glass house on the cliff, Vincent Marchetti was already making plans of his own, plans that would soon crash into the fragile peace Elena had begun to find, and neither she nor Damien yet understood how much worse this story was about to become before it could ever get better. The letter arrived on a gray morning, slipped under the front gate by someone who never showed their face on any camera, addressed simply to Elena, in handwriting she recognized instantly as her father's. She read it standing in the driveway, the wind pulling at the paper in her hands, while Nathan watched from a distance, unsure whether to intervene. My darling girl, it began, and Elena almost laughed at the cruelty of those two words after everything that had happened. I know you are angry, the letter continued. I know you think I abandoned you. I did what I had to do to protect you, and one day you will understand that everything I have done was for your future. Do not trust the man who is keeping you. He is using you to destroy me, and when he is finished with that, he will have no more use for you either. There was no signature, only her father's familiar looping initials at the bottom, the same initials he used to draw on her school lunch bags when she was a child. Elena carried the letter inside and found Damien in the kitchen, and without a word she handed it to him. He read it twice, his face unreadable, before setting it down on the counter. He's trying to make you afraid of me, he said quietly, before I can make you understand what he actually did. Then tell me, Elena said, her voice steady despite the storm inside her. All of it, not fragments, not pieces, everything. I deserve that much. Damien nodded slowly, as if he had known this moment was coming, and had simply been waiting for the courage to meet it. He led her into his study and pulled out a locked drawer she had never seen open before, filled with old papers, bank statements, and a framed photograph of a woman with Damien's same serious eyes. That's her, he said quietly. My mother. Claire Cross looked younger in the photograph than Elena had imagined, standing in front of a small office building with a confident smile, the kind of woman who had built something with her own two hands and was proud of it. 20 years ago, Damien said, she managed money for people who trusted her completely. Your father was her largest client. He moved enormous sums through her firm, in and out, faster than any account should reasonably move. When the shortfall was discovered, all the paperwork pointed to her signature, her authorization, her decisions. But it wasn't her, Elena said quietly, already knowing the answer. It wasn't, Damien said. I spent years finding people willing to talk. A former assistant of hers, an old bank clerk, a lawyer who handled some of the original transfers. Piece by piece, I found signatures that didn't match her handwriting under magnification. I found accounts opened under names that led back to shell companies your father controlled. I found enough to know the truth, even if I never found enough to prove it in a courtroom. Then why not go to the police with what you have? Elena asked. Why an auction? Why me? Because your father owns people in places that matter, Damien said, his voice hardening. Judges, regulators, people who make evidence disappear before it ever reaches a courtroom. I learned that lesson the hard way, more than once. I decided if the law would not give me justice, I would take something he actually valued instead. And that was me, Elena said quietly. That was you, Damien admitted, and for the first time, real shame moved across his face. I am not proud of that choice. I think some part of me knew it was wrong even as I made it. I told myself it was fair. Debt for debt. But watching you these past weeks, I have started to understand that fairness was never really what I was looking for. I wanted him to feel what it was like to lose something he loved and be powerless to stop it. Elena sat with that for a long moment, staring at the photograph of Claire Cross, a woman who had died believing the world thought she was a thief, when in fact she had simply trusted the wrong man with her company's future. I believe you, Elena said finally, and she meant it completely. I don't know if that helps, but I believe every word of what you just told me. Something in Damien's shoulders loosened, as if he had been braced for her to call him a liar, or worse, to hate him entirely. It helps more than you know, he said quietly. That night, unable to settle the storm of thoughts in her head, Elena asked Damien to take her sailing, remembering he had mentioned once that the ocean helped him think. He agreed without hesitation, and they left before sunrise the next morning, the small boat cutting quietly through calm gray water, while the sky slowly turned gold above them. He taught her how to hold the rope, how to read the wind by the way it moved across the surface of the water, how to trust the boat even when it tilted further than felt safe. She laughed, genuinely laughed, for what felt like the first time in weeks, when a sudden gust nearly knocked her off balance, and Damien caught her arm without thinking, steadying her against his side. Sorry, he said quickly, releasing her the moment she was steady again. Don't be, she said, and the honesty in her own voice surprised her. They sat together afterward on the deck, the boat rocking gently, the coastline far behind them, and for a long while neither of them spoke, content simply to exist in the same quiet space, without the weight of debts or revenge, or fathers pressing down on either of them. I looked into leaving today, Elena admitted eventually. I found a bus schedule online. I know where the nearest train station is. I could go, if I wanted to. Why didn't you? Damien asked quietly, his eyes fixed on the horizon rather than her face, as if he was afraid of what he might see there. Because I'm not sure I want to anymore, Elena said honestly. And that terrifies me more than anything that happened at that auction ever did. Damien turned to look at her then, and the careful distance he had kept between them for weeks seemed to dissolve entirely in that single moment. It terrifies me too, he admitted. I bought you to punish a man I hate. I never once planned on this. On what? Elena asked softly. On you becoming the only thing in this house I actually look forward to, he said. The words hung between them, fragile and unguarded, and Elena felt her heart lift in a way she had not allowed herself to feel since this nightmare had begun. She did not know yet whether what she felt for this complicated wounded man was real, or simply the natural result of two damaged people clinging to each other in the middle of a storm neither of them had chosen. But she knew, sitting there on that quiet boat with the whole ocean stretched out around them, that she did not want to leave, not yet, not until she understood exactly what this feeling was. They returned to the house that evening changed, quieter with each other in a way that felt less like distance and more like understanding, and for a few peaceful days, it seemed as though the worst of the storm had already passed. It had not. 3 nights later, Nathan burst into the study without knocking, his face pale, holding a laptop with an email pulled up on the screen. You need to see this, he said, setting it down in front of Damien. Your father's lawyer, he said, glancing at Elena. He's offering a settlement, a very large one. In exchange for Elena's immediate return, no questions asked, no police involvement, and a signed agreement that neither side ever speaks of this again. Damien read the email slowly, his expression darkening with every line. He's not trying to save her, Damien said quietly. He's trying to save himself. If she stays here long enough to tell anyone what she's learned about her father's business, he loses everything, and he knows it. Elena felt a cold certainty settle over her, sharper than any fear the auction itself had given her. He's not doing this because he loves me, she said quietly. He's doing this because I've become dangerous to him. Damien looked at her, and something protective and fierce moved behind his eyes, something that had nothing to do with old debts or revenge at all anymore. Then we make sure he can't reach you, Damien said. Whatever it takes. Elena nodded slowly, her hands steady despite the fear rising in her chest, because for the first time since that curtain had opened on the auction stage weeks ago, She understood clearly that the greatest danger in this story had never really been the man who bought her. It had always been the man who sold her in the first place, and he was not finished yet. Damien refused the settlement within the hour, a short, cold reply drafted by Nathan and sent through a lawyer of his own, but the refusal did nothing to slow what was already moving into place. Vincent Marchetti had never been a man who accepted no as a final answer, and Elena knew that better than anyone in that house. 2 days later, Elena finally worked up the courage to do something she had been quietly considering since the night she read her father's letter. She borrowed Grace's laptop while Damien was away at a meeting in the city, and she typed out an email to a financial crimes investigator whose name she had found buried in one of Damien's old files, a woman named Claudia Ferris, who had apparently tried to reopen Claire Cross's case years earlier, before the trail went cold. She did not tell Damien what she had done, not yet. Some part of her needed this to be her own choice, not something done on his behalf or at his instruction. She needed to be the one who finally spoke the truth about her father out loud, to someone who might actually listen. Claudia responded within a day, cautious but clearly interested, asking for a phone call. Elena gave it, sitting alone in her room with the door locked, describing everything she had learned, the shell companies, the forged signatures, the years her father had let a dead woman carry the blame for his own crimes. Claudia listened without interrupting, and when Elena finished, there was a long pause on the line. "This could be enough to reopen the case," Claudia said finally, "if you're willing to testify to what you've told me." "I am," Elena said, and she meant it completely, even though her hands were shaking as she said it. She hung up feeling lighter than she had in weeks, as if she had finally taken back some small piece of control over her own story. She did not yet understand how quickly that small piece of control would put her in more danger than the auction itself ever had. Her father found out within 2 days. Elena never learned exactly how, whether someone at Claudia's office had a leak, or whether her father simply had eyes everywhere important people gathered. But the message that followed left no room for doubt. It came not as a letter this time, but as a phone call to the house's private line, a number almost no one had. Grace answered it, her face going pale, and handed it to Elena without a word. "You stupid, stupid girl," her father said, his voice stripped of all its usual warmth. "Do you have any idea what you've done? Do you have any idea what people will do to protect what I've built?" "Then maybe you shouldn't have built it on lies," Elena said, her voice steadier than she felt. There was a long silence on the line, and when her father spoke again, his voice had changed entirely, gone quiet and dangerous, in a way Elena had never heard from him before. "You will come home," he said, "one way or another, and you will tell that investigator you made a mistake, that you were confused, that the man holding you filled your head with lies to manipulate you, or I promise you, Elena, things will get very difficult for people you have started to care about in that house." The call ended before Elena could respond, and she stood there holding the phone long after the line had gone dead, cold fear settling into her chest, for reasons that had nothing to do with herself anymore. She found Damien immediately and told him everything. The email, the phone call with Claudia, her father's threat. She expected anger. She braced for it. Instead, Damien listened in silence, his jaw tightening with every detail, and when she finished, he simply nodded once, as if confirming something he had already suspected. "You did the right thing," he said quietly. "I should have gone to someone like Claudia years ago instead of trying to solve this myself. I let my anger convince me revenge was the only answer." "You couldn't have known it would lead here," Elena said. "Maybe not," Damien said. "But I brought this danger into your life the moment I decided you were the way to reach him. Whatever happens next is because of choices I made, not choices you made." Elena stepped closer to him, closing the distance that had defined so much of their strange, complicated story from the very beginning. "I made my own choice too," she said quietly. "I chose to call Claudia. I chose to tell the truth. Don't take that away from me by carrying all the blame yourself." Something in Damien's expression cracked open then, raw and unguarded in a way she had never seen from him. "I need you to know something," he said, his voice low and rough. "This stopped being about your father a long time ago. I don't know exactly when it happened, but somewhere between that boat and this conversation, You stopped being collateral to me. You became the only thing I actually care about protecting." Elena felt her breath catch, felt the walls she had carefully kept between them finally give way completely. "Then don't let me leave," she said softly. "Not because you're holding me here, because I don't want to go." He reached for her then, gently, giving her every chance to step back if she wanted to, and when she didn't, his hand found the side of her face with a tenderness that felt like the opposite of everything the auction had been. For a long moment, the two of them simply stood there, foreheads close together, breathing the same air, finally honest with each other after weeks of careful distance. The moment did not last. Nathan's voice crashed through the quiet, urgent and sharp, calling Damien's name from somewhere near the front of the house. Damien pulled back instantly, every trace of softness replaced by sharp alertness, and Elena followed him toward the sound of Nathan's voice with her heart pounding. "Cameras just picked up 2 vehicles at the bottom of the hill," Nathan said, pulling up footage on a tablet, his hands moving fast. "They're not local. Plates don't match anything registered nearby. They've been sitting there for 20 minutes without approaching the gate." Damien's face went hard and still. "Get Elena to the safe room," he said. "Now." "I'm not hiding while you handle this alone," Elena said immediately. "This isn't about pride," Damien said, turning to her, his voice sharp with urgency rather than anger. "If your father sent people to bring you back by force, the safest place for you is somewhere they cannot reach. Please, Elena, let me keep you safe this time, in a way that actually means something." Something in his voice reached her more than any argument could have, and Elena nodded, allowing Grace to guide her quickly toward a reinforced room behind the study, hidden behind what looked like an ordinary bookshelf, built years earlier for exactly this kind of danger. She sat in the small, quiet room, her heart pounding, listening to muffled voices and movement beyond the walls, unable to see anything, forced to trust that Damien and Nathan could handle whatever was approaching the house. Minutes stretched into what felt like hours, though the clock on the wall told her it had only been 20. Then she heard it. Raised voices near the front entrance, unfamiliar ones mixed with Nathan's sharp commands, and beneath it all, Damien's voice, steady and commanding, refusing to let anyone through the door. Elena pressed her ear against the hidden panel, straining to hear, her whole body tense with fear not for herself, but for the man who had once bought her to punish her father, and was now standing between her and the danger her father had sent. She heard a sound then that made her blood run cold, a heavy thud against something solid, followed by a sharp cry of pain that was unmistakably Damien's voice. Without thinking, without weighing the danger to herself at all, Elena pushed open the hidden panel and ran toward the sound, because whatever safety this room offered meant nothing to her if it meant leaving him to face her father's men alone. She reached the front hall just in time to see Damien on one knee, one hand pressed against his side, blood seeping between his fingers, while Nathan struggled to hold back 2 men Elena had never seen before, and a third man stood near the door, watching with the cold satisfaction of someone who believed he had already won. "Elena," her father's voice called from behind the third man, stepping into view at last, his expression calm and almost gentle, as if none of this violence around him mattered at all. "Come home. This can all be over right now." Elena looked at her father, truly looked at him, seeing for the first time not the man who had raised her, but the man capable of sending people to hurt someone she had come to care for deeply, simply to protect his own secrets. And in that single, terrifying moment, she understood with complete clarity exactly which side of this story she belonged to, and it was not the side her father was standing on. "Come home," her father said again, his voice smooth and reasonable, as if the man kneeling on the floor beside him meant nothing at all. Elena did not move toward her father. She moved toward Damien instead, dropping to her knees beside him, pressing her hands over his to help stop the bleeding, ignoring the danger still standing just a few feet away. "You need a doctor," she said, her voice shaking but firm. "Right now." "I'm fine," Damien said through gritted teeth, though the pale color of his face told a different story. "You are not fine," Elena snapped, then turned her head to look directly at her father for the first time since he had walked through that door. "Call an ambulance, now, or I swear to you, whatever happens after this, I will make sure everyone knows exactly what kind of man you really are." Something flickered across her father's face. Uncertainty, perhaps, or the first real fear he had shown since arriving. He glanced at the two men still struggling with Nathan, then back at his daughter kneeling on the floor beside the man he had sent them to remove from her life. "This isn't how this was supposed to go," he said quietly, almost to himself. "No," Elena said, her voice cold and clear. "It wasn't supposed to go the way it started either, but here we are." Sirens sounded in the distance moments later, faint at first, then growing louder, and Elena would learn afterward that Grace, hidden safely upstairs, had called emergency services the moment the shouting began, ignoring Damien's earlier instructions entirely, because some situations mattered more than following orders. The two unfamiliar men fled before the sirens arrived, disappearing into the dark vehicles waiting at the bottom of the hill, but Vincent Marchetti remained standing in the doorway of his daughter's new life, frozen by the sound of approaching authority, unable to run without confirming his own guilt completely. The next several hours passed in a blur for Elena. Paramedics arrived and took Damien to a hospital, the wound in his side serious but, thankfully, not deep enough to threaten his life, a fact the doctors confirmed with careful relief once they had cleaned and closed it. Police arrived shortly after, along with, remarkably, Claudia Ferris herself, who had been building a case against Vincent Marchetti for longer than Elena had ever known, waiting only for enough solid evidence to move forward safely. Elena's testimony, combined with the documents Damien had spent years quietly gathering, combined with new statements from men who had briefly worked for her father and had grown tired of protecting his secrets, finally gave Claudia enough to act. Vincent Marchetti was arrested that same night, standing in the very driveway of the house he had once accused of holding his daughter against her will, and Elena watched it happen from the doorway, with an emotion she could not fully name, something between grief and relief, mourning the father she had once believed in, even as she recognized the necessity of what was happening. The following weeks unfolded slowly, carefully, like something healing rather than something breaking. Damien recovered at the house on the cliff, patient and stubborn in equal measure, refusing to slow down as much as the doctors insisted he should, while Elena spent her days quietly at his side, no longer collateral, no longer a hostage, simply someone who had chosen, freely and completely, to stay exactly where she was. The auction ring itself, once investigators began pulling at its threads, unraveled faster than anyone expected. Claudia's team, working with federal authorities, identified and arrested several of the men who had organized the auctions, along with a number of the wealthy bidders who had attended them, though Elena chose, deliberately, to focus on healing rather than following every detail of that investigation. Some wounds, she had learned, needed distance more than knowledge. Claire Cross's name was formally cleared 3 months later, a small ceremony attended by only a handful of people, including Damien, who stood quietly through the whole thing, with an expression Elena had never seen on him before, something like peace finally settling over years of grief and anger. Elena stood beside him, holding his hand, understanding that this moment mattered more to him than almost anything else that had happened in this entire story. "She's finally free of it," he said quietly afterward, standing outside the small courthouse where the ruling had been read. "All these years I thought clearing her name would feel like winning something. It just feels like finally being allowed to grieve properly." "That's not nothing," Elena said gently. "That's actually everything." He looked at her then, the late afternoon sun catching the lines of his face, softer now than she had ever seen them, and something in his expression made her heart ache with a tenderness she never could have imagined feeling for this man, on the night she had stood behind that velvet curtain. "I keep waiting for you to leave," he admitted quietly. "Every morning I wake up expecting to find you gone, back to whatever life you would have had if none of this ever happened." "Do you want me to go?" Elena asked, though she already knew the answer, needing to hear him say it anyway. "No," he said immediately, without hesitation. "I have never wanted anything less in my entire life. I just don't understand how I got lucky enough to have you choose to stay, after everything I did to bring you here in the first place." Elena reached for his hand, lacing her fingers through his, feeling the solid warmth of him grounding her the way the ocean view outside their window had once grounded her, during her most frightened nights in that house. "You didn't buy someone who learned to love you," she said softly. "You freed someone who was drowning in her father's lies long before that auction ever happened. I just didn't know it yet." Damien pulled her closer then, resting his forehead gently against hers, and for a long, quiet moment, neither of them said anything at all, because nothing needed to be said. Life did not become simple after that, not entirely. There were still hard conversations ahead, still legal proceedings related to her father that Elena would need to face in the coming months, still nights when old fear crept back unexpectedly, triggered by a loud noise or a stranger's raised voice. But she faced those nights now with Damien beside her instead of alone, and slowly, steadily, the fear lost its grip over her, replaced by something sturdier, something built on choice rather than circumstance. 6 months after the night everything nearly fell apart, Elena stood once again on the terrace of the house on the cliff, watching the same ocean that had witnessed her fear, her anger, her slow and unexpected healing. Damien joined her quietly, wrapping an arm around her shoulders, and together, they watched the sun sink into the water, painting the sky in shades of gold and deep orange. "Grace tells me you've been looking at architecture programs," Elena said, glancing sideways at him with a small smile. "Just looking," Damien admitted, though something hopeful flickered across his face. "It's been a long time since I let myself want something that had nothing to do with revenge or old debts." "I think you should do it," Elena said. "Build something that's just yours, that exists because you wanted it to, not because someone else forced your hand." He turned to look at her fully then, the ocean wind pulling gently at her hair, and something in his eyes told her he was no longer thinking about buildings at all. "I already have," he said quietly. "This, us. It's the only thing I've built in years that actually feels like it will last." Elena leaned into him, resting her head against his shoulder, watching the last light fade over the water, and for the first time since a velvet curtain had opened on a stage full of strangers deciding her worth in numbers, she felt completely, unmistakably free. Not because anyone had released her. Because she had finally chosen, with her whole heart, exactly where she belonged. And Damien Cross, the man who had once bought her to punish her father, now understood with complete certainty that he would spend the rest of his life refusing to let her go, not out of possession or old anger, but because some things, once found, were never meant to be let go of at all.